Hello, Unit 6. My name is Lynn Simons, and I'm a district court judge for the state of Nevada. And I'm excited to be here. And I like to remind the teams to take a very deep breath right now.
Hi, I'm Murray Snow. I am Judge of the Federal District Court in Arizona.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Waller, and I'm the Director for K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages at the Department of Education in Arizona.
And would you introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, my name is Abby Walton.
I'm Megan Hodges.
I'm Reed Rabin.
I'm Grace Harper.
We are Unit 6 from Sheridan High School. Our mentors are Mike Thomas and Kim Ferguson.
All right. Well, Unit 6, what challenges might face American constitutional democracy in the 21st century? President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Please discuss what disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? And to what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" You may begin.
As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, millions of citizens are deeply disturbed that the military-industrial complex too often shapes national policy.
Along with this, former President Eisenhower warned in his farewell address that we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. Concurring with both the civil rights activist and former U.S. President Eisenhower, we as a panel agree that the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Relating this to current events such as nuclear warfare in the Middle East, we recognize the importance of Eisenhower's words as there has been an escalation at various levels in Iraq on the security, political, and media levels.
Even as a renowned Federalist with a firm belief in the need for a strong national government, James Madison addressed the Constitutional Convention by saying that a standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty.
Many of the founding fathers strongly argued against a standing army due to the financial constraints, which led to the passing of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12, or better known as the Army Clause, which states that Congress shall have power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. In modern day, the military also spends about $9 billion on the construction and management of military facilities such as barracks and family housing, with an additional $25 billion for base operations in just 1 year.
Additionally, the National History Education Clearinghouse analyzed that Madison's language reflected a common concern that the maintenance of a standing army in the new United States would place financial burdens on the young government.
Today, with the national debt reaching over $28 trillion, which is the equivalent to every individual U.S. citizen being $85,000 in debt, we can see that Madison's foresight has only been proven true, marking this as an extremely relevant issue today.
However, we've recognized that some of the founders' forewarnings are not relevant to today, specifically the Third Amendment. Currently, the Third Amendment is the least litigated amendment today, as the Supreme Court has never used the Third Amendment as a main basis for a ruling. With the military budget for housing approaching $9 billion in 2019, it is made clear that the United States has the infrastructure needed to house soldiers. While there are some modern-day implications relating to domestic privacy in cases such as Griswold v. Connecticut, many people view the Third Amendment as the least important.
In addition, the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia provided checks on any standing army by allowing the president to command it, but Congress to finance it by using short-term legislation.
By rendering checks and balances on these two branches, it prevented the executive and legislative branch from taking advantage of a standing army, which ultimately proves that the fear of violation of the Third Amendment is not applicable today.
Concurring with former U.S. Representative Ron Paul's idea that we have a globe-straddling empire and a very intrusive foreign policy for decades that incites a lot of hatred and resentment toward us, we as a panel agree that the United States should have a limited international military presence because of the financial constraints placed upon our government at the moment. This strain is seen as our federal budget, as the current military spending is an estimated $934 billion. Former President Jimmy Carter's foreign policy clearly shows how an intricate involvement with humanitarian issues can severely inhibit a president's job to deal with domestic issues.
For example, an overextension of the United States government through Jimmy Carter's presidency first began with the Iranian hostage crisis of 1970. This then led to Operation Eagle Claw, which led to the death of many Americans, making it one of the major flaws of the Carter administration and a clear case of failure in a humanitarian foreign policy.
Concluding with the words of Eisenhower in his last speech as president, as we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience, the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without asking the loss of their political and spiritual heritage.
We are now ready to take your questions.
All right, thank you. And I understand from your testimony your position with regard to international presence, but I want to talk to you specifically about the positive and negative aspects of a military presence, for example, in the Spratly Islands near China, where China is attempting to take over an island which really represents a huge trade avenue. So when you're considering the economics, would that change your position at all regarding limiting international presence?
Well, for our foreign policy, we agree that it is only necessary for us to get involved when it benefits us. So, for example, because that is an economic advantage, we would get involved in that. But an example where we would not get involved is Myanmar or current-day Burma. And because we have no ties there, and because after their recent election, the military took back the government, it would make no sense for us to get involved.
I think I heard you say that the executive and legislative branch can't in the Army. But I'm not sure that I quite understood why. Whom or what the framers control over, right? Why is that a sufficient effect?
Can you repeat that? We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. To whom or to what did the framers give control over the military? And why? What is that sufficient? And military power.
Well, in Article 2, Section 2, it gives the president to be the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. And today we can see that the executive branch has taken bigger control over foreign policy compared to all three branches.
However, we do have a check and balance because Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 gives Congress the power to approve budgets and spending for the military. And another check and balance on the president's commander-in-chief power is that Congress can override a veto with 2/3.
So what happens if the president and the Congress are at odds about the use of the military? Who calls the shots?
As said in the Constitution, the president is the commander-in-chief of the Army. So under the Constitution, the president will command and call the shots of our military.
But we can also see an example of the War Powers Act limiting the president and the funds he's able to put towards the military.
So I'm going to follow up on you just mentioned the War Powers Act. To what extent do you believe the War Powers Act has been successful in limiting presidential power? And can you give an example? Do you need me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay. To what extent do you believe the War Powers Act has been successful? Can you give me an example?
An example for the War Powers Act could be, as we've seen, when the United States entered Vietnam and Congress was able to limit the spending in Vietnam, and I think that's an example.
And that proves very helpful because our current national debt is $28 trillion, and Congress limiting our military spending could help that because already currently our military budget is $934 billion.
Do you believe that the government should require all citizens to register for selective service. Why or why not?
I think that it would be unfair for the government to require citizens to, all of them, to register for the national service, just because that would be assuming that every single citizen in the United States is eligible to do that. Today, currently, there is a bunch of people that have physical and mental disabilities that would unable to register for that, so I think it would be unfair for the government to require that.
Additionally, in the Declaration of Independence, we claim the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so you could argue that requiring every citizen to enroll in that goes against their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Under what circumstances, if any, the National Guard be deployed domestically?
Can you repeat the last part of your question? We cannot hear you, sir.
I am so sorry. Under what circumstances, if any, should the National Guard be deployed domestically?
So a recent example of when the National Guard was deployed domestically was during the Black Lives Matter protests. About 7% of these protests were violent, so in some cases it was necessary to send in the National Guard. For example, in Minneapolis, there was looting and there were fires, and so in this case it was necessary because the National Guard was able to help protect the citizens of Minneapolis.
In addition to this, the court case Perpich versus the Department of Defense stated that Congress can call in the National Guard without the consent of the governor. So I think that in such cases, such as hurricane relief and other economic and environmental issues, that we should have the National Guard come in under Congress or the governor.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that we should only intervene if it benefits our interest. How would this philosophy impact some of our current treaties and obligations?
A current example of this would be tensions with China and Taiwan. China is currently wanting to take over Taiwan, but because of our allyship with Taiwan, we cannot do that. But we also need China in our back pocket if we're going to be able to do anything about increasing powers in North Korea. So this comes to a hard tie between when do we intervene for the benefit of our people or our allyship.
Do you think that ROTC programs should be available in all high schools and should offer opportunities for recruitment in all high schools?
Yes, I believe that ROTC programs should be offered because just as the government is obligated to offer education to everyone through Common Core standards, if people are willing to join the military, they should be able to have the information to be able to do that.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of a draft?
Of what? The draft. Did you say of the draft?
Yeah.
I think that some disadvantage would be in former President Trump's last presidency. He said that transgenders can no longer be in the draft. However, with Biden's new presidency, we can see that he's trying to overturn that right now. And so I think that that would be one disadvantage to some of the minorities in the country if they're not able to participate in the draft.
And I think to add one final statement to clarify my colleague's statement, the draft should be eligible to all peoples of the American population. So if we have a presidential power excluding a small percent of, as only 6% of the American population is considered transgender, 0.6%. 0.6%, that would not be including the true meaning of the draft.
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with both my... Oh, all right.
So, sorry about that. I let you go a little bit longer, but he held the time up just a bit ago, but good job.
Thank you. Thank you, judges.
So I enjoyed your presentation a lot. I think that you had a lot of examples. You had some examples that we have not heard thus far. And I thought some, practical observations and, for example, the hurricane relief, really looking in on the military has a already phenomenal infrastructure and how it can be applied to other domestic issues. I would slow down just a bit in your testimony. That's why I always try to remind people to take a deep breath, because we need to catch up with you, and we're trying to navigate what your theme is, and it's easier if you kind of spoon feed us a bit slower. And I liked a lot of your statistics and your application of mentioning the Third Amendment and the lack of case law. So I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
I also thought that the Third Amendment was interesting and a relevant point. If we're talking about the military in today's world, I think it was worth pointing out that one of the protections that was thought necessary at the time of the Constitution has not really been really a problem in today's world. I thought that was good. One of the things, though, that you might think about, and I also thought it was good that you cited the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act is clearly an attempt by Congress to regain some of the war power that has sort of trickled toward the president over time. But I might point out that when you mention those things, it's a good idea if you would then throw in a little idea about their usage or non-usage, as one of my other judges suggested. And one of the things you could do is actually look at the text of the Constitution or cite those texts. Because while the president has the commander-in-chief power, Congress has the power to cut off with or without the War Powers Act. So one of the things that I thought was interesting observation made under the War Powers Act, which actually was just the raw powers. I thought you were engaged and enthusiastic and worked well together, and I enjoyed that very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I concur with my fellow judges. I really like the diversity of examples and kind of approaching the question in a different way. That's what I love about Unit 6 is we hear something new every single time. I thought you guys did a nice job pulling in the constitutional application and those debates with the Federalist Papers. I think the controversy over the standing army. I would just echo to slow down, and then when answering the question, give the question answer first, and then some of your examples to support and to follow. But I think you guys did a fantastic job. It was very enjoyable, and I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was great. And good luck for the rest of the day. And you are free to go.
Thank you. Thank you, judges.